Joe, complete domination in Columbus, Ohio, as the Ohio State Buckeyes absolutely respond to, after their loss to Michigan, they respond by absolutely bludgeoning Tennessee. Your thoughts on the game?
So, Blake, if our listeners recall, one of the things that we repeated a number of times and that I emphasized during this lead up over the past couple of weeks for this game specifically, we discussed how Ohio State is potentially the biggest wild card in this playoff.
No doubt.
And one of the things that I mentioned is that if they come out in this game and they're locked in and they play their best football, they have one of the best rosters in all the country. And if they play the same way that they played against Georgia 2 years ago, they can go on a trajectory to win a national title. And I think that the way that they played today reminded us of that. They reminded us that if they're being able to produce these huge chunk plays through the air to Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and then run the ball, and Will Howard doesn't have to seemingly do everything, and he doesn't feel as, tense when he's in the pocket, and their defense is this smothering, they 100% belong in that conversation as one of the teams that can win a national title. The seeding doesn't matter here. I think that they are the lowest seeded team that deserves to be in that conversation, and I personally would take them more seriously than I would take a team like Texas.
So Ohio State, so to the argument that you're basically making or thought process, Joe, Ohio State was the only team in the field that was not in the top four that had the talent to be a true national title contender, right? Mm-hmm. So when we look at Ohio State, I mean, they were the number 2 team in the nation when they fell to Michigan. But regardless of that, okay, it kind of makes my point from earlier when we talked about, hey, talent does win. So the losses, okay, like they had 2 losses in the Big Ten. The more talented team won. And I think that is where you look at this and say, hey, look, they had a couple of 3 weeks to respond from getting embarrassed, and they responded. And you got to give it to them. Look, I thought Tennessee did have some early success, but then the face mask, okay, then you go all the way down the field. You should have been off the field, but they go all the way down the field, and they just kept going to Jeremiah Smith, fade, drag, and that's what opened the floodgates. They didn't score in the second quarter, Joe, and you felt like it was still a complete domination by Ohio State, which it was. I think another thing, too, is that one team they put their head down and got to work, and they got embarrassed, and they were mentally focused. It might have been, arguably, Joe, the best thing that could have happened to Ohio State. I mean, look, they ran the football effectively. I'm not even putting that pick on Will Howard, really. He threw dimes tonight, Joe. I mean, dude was throwing dimes. And against what we had talked about, too, Tennessee, a really bad secondary, they just didn't have anybody that's really testing them through the air like that. But, look, all in all, man, really great performance by Ohio State, and it's going to be interesting to see what they're going into next week in the Rose Bowl if they're able to respond again. And look, man, I got to tell you, if this Ohio State team shows up, then they can win the national title.
Right, and they are put in this position where if they beat Oregon, they have a trajectory that sets them up perfectly to walk right into the national championship game. They have the advantage of already facing Oregon to know how to rehandle that situation. Now, I will say, and it showed up a tiny bit here, and, John Fryer also got banged up in the game. I don't know what his exact injury status is. He came back into the game, but it was very early on. They mentioned how he was banged up. The health of the offensive line still concerns me, but I have to give them a ton of credit for the way that they showed up, because that was our biggest concern. They were going up against the deepest defensive line in the country, and they passed the test. The way that they passed that test is by how Chip Kelly schemed things. And that was what we talked about coming into the game, is that if they're galvanized and focused, and more importantly, if they're saying, we got all these dang playmakers, we got all of these really good athletes all over our receiving core and at running back, we just need to get them the ball in space. We need to stop overthinking things and just go out there and play ball and out athlete an opposing defense. They can go shot for shot with Oregon, and we're going to find out if they're able to do that and survive the smothering pass rush that Oregon brings to the table.
Well, look, it needs to be mentioned here, and I don't want to be that guy, but I am going to be that guy. It needs to be mentioned that Dylan Sampson got 2 carries, okay? And Tennessee
was also banged up.
Right, and there goes the point too where, like, Joe, the only way that they were going to keep this close is if they could run the football with Dylan Sampson. Like, let's just be real. I thought Heupel and defensively, both, I thought they got out coached. Not only were they less talented, but they severely got out coached. I mean, Joe, they're running. It's a 3rd and 7, and their DBs are backed off on trips right. Meaning Tennessee's DBs are backed off on trips right 12 yards. Like, what are you doing? And then a drag route comes to Jeremiah Smith, and I'm like, what are we trying to accomplish here? Then, Joe, they come out in the second half, this Tennessee, and they're moving the football down the field for 2 first downs, and then on a 3rd and 7, Joe, they run a speed option to the short side of the field, and I'm like, with a 3rd string running back because Bishop got banged up. So I mean, look, man, an outright bludgeoning. They couldn't run the football, and they asked Nico Imalava to throw the football to win the football game, and he's not ready to do that. Not even close. Now, I'll give him this. If he can put some things together mentally and start clicking offensively and he gets some receivers, maybe. Because the kid's got athletic ability. You can tell that he's got really good athletic ability. But the timing and the processing is not there yet. And this is not you got to be 2 reads and out. And we talked about this in the preview, right? For him. Joe, if he's not 2 reads and out of there, and he's just sitting back there, it's horrible. And here's the last thing before I kick it back over to you.
Okay.
Ohio State did not walk down the box once Dylan Sampson got out of the game. They went too high. They begged them to run the football, right? They begged them. They did not get out of coverage all night. And when Tennessee felt pressure and they couldn't run the football, it was over, man. It was over when Jeremiah Smith, and I tweeted this at you, when Jeremiah Smith, I'm like, Joe, it's 7-0. I'm like, throw a haymaker here and it's over, right? And they throw the fade route to Emeka Egbuka, and off to the races they went. So they came out throwing haymakers, and look, it's not missed upon me either that all of the home teams dominated at home in these situations.
I'm sure that the Bull presidents are going to find a way to say that, oh, look at this. We need to have all of the settings for all these games be bowl games, and we can have the Bad Boy Mowers Bowl host one of the first round games in the future. On a more serious note, geez, it has been a long day. Serious note, to Nico's defense, to the point that you brought up, I think in like this game, he didn't really have much to work with. And that was another piece that we highlighted in the preview that we did a couple of weeks ago when I said that Ohio State was going to win, was that they did not have the receivers that were going to be able to separate against Igbinosin and against Denzel Burke and Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom. They just weren't going to be able to create the space for Nico to make the read. And I give him credit for extending plays and running in situations that he typically wasn't during the regular season, but it just wasn't enough. They need to go out and get receivers. Tennessee to take that next step this upcoming year, they desperately need some athletic receivers.
Well, there's not, I mean, the top tier guys are gone. I mean, to that point though, Joe, when they did get separation, I mean, the 3rd down, when you're down 14-0, Braswell's wide open.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, Joe, he I think it was Burke maybe slips down. He's wide open and he's 3 ticks late. He's able to catch back up with him. And I'm like, and it ball's underthrown. And I mean, look, Tennessee is a one-trick pony. And when that trick goes away, even though that trick is very good, when you don't have that in your deck of cards, you're going to get your ass whooped. Now, again, I will emphasize, if that is the Ohio State team that's going to show up every single week, they can win a national title. I think talent versus talent, Joe, I can make the argument. If they can run the football on Oregon, I mean, I don't know if they can't win the whole damn thing. So, look, it was a great effort by Tennessee. It just, look, man, it wasn't even close to enough, and you didn't have the dudes, and when you couldn't run the ball, it was enough. I will say this, though. The front 7, I thought, really, really stood up for Ohio State. I mean, when you can put 6 guys, 5 guys in the box and they can't run the ball, I mean, Joe, it was a bludgeoning.
Yeah, they completely worked them, and that's just plays into the well-roundedness. And I stand by that point. If Ohio State does this and plays with this intensity against Oregon, they will win the national championship this year.
Oh, without a doubt. And look, the 4 sacks, it's worse than that, right? The pressures, I think, was around 16. Yeah. It's because Nico got out of so much. I mean, I'm highly impressed by Ohio State, man. I mean, it is an impressive football team. They are a very talented football team. And look, the right guard at the end of the game, Jack Sawyer comes up to him, is like, "Look, man, I'm so proud of you." I mean, Joey took a lot of criticism. He got worked. I mean, they got worked last week. I mean, 3 weeks ago. Let's just call it what it is. So I'm acting like we pre-recorded this and 3 weeks ago or something. But I mean, he got worked. Okay. And then now you're just seeing him buy in. And I got to say this, Chip Kelly called a hell of a game. One hell of a game. They got speed and they utilized that speed and they took advantage of man-to-man coverage. I mean, Joe, here's the crazy thing. If you really think about it, they didn't do things like very special in this sense. There wasn't double moves or so. They ran drag routes, fade routes, rub routes, and a couple of quick slants, couple of quick hitches. That was their game plan. It's not as if that they were coming out here doing some elaborate scheme like rolling somebody out, whatever. It was basic stuff that isolating Jeremiah Smith. And Joe, I want to say this too before we get out of here. This is what you and I have been calling for Ohio State all year, right? We had been calling for Ohio State to throw the ball more to him. Like if he's got 15 targets, so what? He's going to make those plays. There's not a lot of human beings, even if him being a freshman, there's not a lot of people that can guard him. And Tennessee is one of those, man. I mean, that kid is special. I mean, he's the player of the game for me. I'm going to be real with you. He's the player of the whole first round for me. I don't think anybody showed me that they can be more dominant than Jeremiah Smith this entire first round. If that young man, who's now technically a sophomore, this semester's going to be going into a sophomore.
No. Well,
all season starts in January. Technically, you know what I'm trying to say.
Still junior or a freshman.
Well, I mean, if you're a midterm enrollee, you've been there a year. So, I mean, he's been a midterm enrollee. Anyway, regardless, it doesn't. None of that matters. He is a freak of nature. Kirk's even called it on the telecast. I mean, they call him Baby Megatron, man.
Yeah. My last thing here, though, just to reiterate, off of what you said, if they're focused and they stay focused, which I think that they are, this Michigan loss was a rallying point. That's why I keep bringing up 2 years ago. They rallied after that Michigan loss, and they played what was really the national championship game against Georgia. They played an unreal game that was extremely entertaining to watch. They have every capability. If they play their best ball and they play focused, it's all on the table for them. Let's see if they can bring it to fruition.
Rose Bowl next week. We'll see.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.